Hey everybody, it's Mikey with Caliber Customs. Huge thank you to T-Rail Photography for shooting this video. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you. This is my 1985 Toyota Levin. This is my personal race car that I've had for about 15 years and built with a partnership of Caliber Customs, along with actually doing this a lot in my own home garage. So I kind of want to take you through a build of where everything's currently at, the engine setup, the suspension, just kind of give you a once over of the car as a total completed build, something that, built myself and in partnership with the shop. All right, so we'll take a quick look at the exterior. We'll do a full walk around. We'll start the proper way, tip to butt. The front end is actually a Levin front end, which most people would catch. It's not your traditional pop-up headlight of your US spec Corollas. So this is something offered in the Japanese market that is a little bit different, something you don't normally see. So we'll take each piece at a hand. The whole front end, as far as the hood and fenders, made by Group A Motoring. It's aftermarket fiberglass setup. The bumper is kind of an eye catcher as well, in the sense it is made by Technopro Spirits in a very limited run. To my knowledge, it is the only one in the United States, so it does have kind of a uniqueness to it that catches people's eye pretty quickly. A lot of the little stuff around is kind of hard to get your hands on, especially like this little light trim. Some guys over in the UK actually 3D print them, and they offer them so you can just have them as a raw, so you can paint them up, do whatever you'd like to. I ended up wrapping them in carbon, trying to take the detail and try to start giving the little splash of carbon throughout that we needed. From Technopro Spirits, these front ends actually don't have any provisions for lights because it is a race trimmed bumper. And I really wanted to kind of keep that street style aesthetic through. And it actually would upset probably quite a few people. I took an original JDM bumper that had the corner lights and wanted to have them inset just like it would be stock. So we actually did cut up an entire Japanese bumper to get these in. So it's a whole section cut out, Frenched in, put back into place. They have a big opening on the factory piece that I wasn't really going to utilize. And I did want to do brake ducts, but didn't want to have this gigantic opening because I wasn't going to utilize it. So ended up making some carbon pieces that trim into place and get everything sealed up just to try to mitigate as much air as I possibly could through the radiator. So working our way back, another big one too, that you have a lot of high pressure air that will work its way into the fender, start pushing things out and cause lift. So I actually did cut these up and put these drop vents on top of them and try to get some of that hot air out, which both helps with just your general aero and helps with underhood cooling as well, because you start mitigating pressure in through the fenders. The wheel and tire combo is actually SSR Dory Dories. I've wanted a set of these for the longest time and looked through for many, many years to try and find the right sizing and offset of what I wanted. And these popped up on Marketplace. Actually, a friend of mine owned them, and so got the opportunity to buy them, restore them, paint them the color I wanted to, had them powder coated, and they're absolutely perfect. Tires are a Falcon RT660s. These are the Plus model, so this is the newest trim, the newest, stickiest, best thing that you can get your hands on. They're a relatively small 225, but for us Corolla guys, it's actually a pretty big tire. The brake setup behind it, which we'll get to touch on a little bit later, is a full stop tech setup. With a full race brake, it makes a huge difference in this lightweight car. So working our way back, we've got Time Machine 86. These are OEM style restorations. So they offer them in like a fiberglass resin, but the beautiful carbon works its way through. Retrospect made some side scripts for it, which I don't recommend ever buying from them. They will take your money and they will disappear and never return with it. One of the big things with these 86 is that it becomes very impossible to get your hands on. All of the original window trims, Toyota no longer makes them. It's very hard to get a hold of, so to have a fully trimmed car is actually a pretty special thing. So we'll work our way back. It does have I call this an OEM Plus because the OEM spoiler is a little bit smaller than this. It's got that little bit of a wicker build to actually give not a gigantic amount of downforce, but enough that I feel like it's going to be making a reasonable difference. Your OEM Japanese rear bumper tries to tie into just that nice, clean, and simple look. I didn't want to go aftermarket because I didn't like that big, extreme, oversized body look. I want to keep it close to an OEM style as much as I possibly could. The rear fenders are rolled and flared and pulled about as much as you possibly can. And you can see even in this rear, there's almost no room left. There's just absolutely tire up against fender in certain corners where it's loaded hard enough, but enough that it still does fit. All right, now we'll work our way into the interior. We'll start off out the back and get a nice look through. Godzilla. So the rear itself is actually pretty dirty now that I'm looking at it. But one of the things was actually when I got this car, the chassis itself was pretty bent, and somebody tried to lift it from the spare tire tub, so it was crushed pretty bad. So I ended up cutting it out entirely and using this chunk of carbon just to take up the space. We did a full cage, or should I say a back half cage, 6-point tie that ties the rear strut towers, and you can start to see the bars going forward. It does provide a massive amount of strength improvement and obviously your own safety and peace of mind that if anything ever goes bad, you're protected. We'll set this down carefully. So we'll work our way through, and again, of more of the highlights of the cage in itself. We did go full chromoly, and one of the kind of parts that I thought would be really fun is I ended up polishing the entire cage and clear coating it, just so you get to see all the colors of the weld, everything comes up to temperature, and I think it just overall kind of gave it a fun aesthetic. But the biggest surprise is the amount of strength it gave. You can lift this car up in one corner and it'll pick the entire other side up. There's almost no flex in the chassis whatsoever. It's pretty fantastic. So one of the bigger components that actually had a gigantic improvement in handling is I did the full equal length 4-link setup, which is manufactured by T3. So it gives these giant boxes to put your upper rear axle link into a better spot so it doesn't have the potential to bind, and gives you a lot more adjustment to actually set up your anti-dive and anti-squat for getting the rear tires planted, especially on track where you're traction limited. It makes a gigantic difference, and the car drove 10 times better as soon as we got everything dialed in. It's a lot of adjustment to get it right. Honestly, it took me probably about 2 months to finally get it sorted, just testing and trying to really feel what was working the best for the car, and finally got it dialed in, and it's worth every bit of 2 months worth of tweaking to get it right.
Mikey, question for you.
Answers.
What's with the battery box?
I asked one of my lovely technicians to make me a battery box and gave him the dimensions that I needed, and he made it for me. I very much appreciate his hard work and his signature. Thank you, Steve. Very much appreciated. But yeah, that's what I get for not making it myself. So that is the reason why that has stayed for so many years.
All right, well, let's show me what we got going on here in the front seat.
Okay. So pilot seat controls, one that was always a big one for me was pedal feel, especially with AE86s and lightweight cars. Everything is all about carrying as much speed and momentum as long as you possibly can. And having absolutely dialed brakes has always been my personal pick. If you've ever driven a full race bred car with manual brakes, you know what I'm talking about, in the sense that every little pebble of grip that you can feel with a brake pedal is incredible. So went with a full Tilton setup. It's dual master, so you have the ability to adjust your bias with an independent master, not just cutting line pressure. It is a full manual setup, so it does take a little bit more effort, but it gives you that absolute perfect feel that you need. And you don't run the risk of boiling fluid as much because the reservoirs are here in the car with me, so you have a lot better temperatures overall. So it is a full floor mounted box, which is why I've got a false floor sitting on top of it. Gives it a little bit higher foot pedal area, but the overall feel is perfect. One of the trick little items that we have that most people don't know until you drive it is the 86 has a manual steering rack. So the rack itself doesn't have any type of power assist. So what you add in its place, what I've modified up there, is a Toyota Yaris steering column. It's They consider it an EPAS, so it's electronic power assisted steering. So it's got a CAN-based signal that varies it on speed and gives you the assist of power steering without having any power steering pump tied to the engine, where it just does not have a provision to do so. So I can turn that on and off as I need to, or adjust it as I need to. It's very nice on street, and when I'm autocrossing it, just giving me that ability to have very light, very nimble steering. There's no extra effort required. Then I turn it off on track and have all the feeling that I need to for a manual steering setup. For gauges, I've kept them very simple. I don't need to see what speed I'm doing. I've just got a tachometer for my own peace of mind, water temperature and oil pressure. I know air fuel is going to be sorted out by the ECU, so I don't need to watch and look at it. The motor itself is, because it is fairly stock, it doesn't really need a whole lot of attention. It's not like it's a turbocharged engine that suddenly I might have a fuel mixture that I'm frightened about. The shifter in itself is actually a cube shifter. Guys out of Australia make that. I'll splash with little bits of a JSP fab, and I couldn't live without a cup holder, so thanks to JSP for supplying that for me. So one of the big things too, especially with all of your high tier race cars, sliders don't provide the highest level of support. So having a fixed bracket just like this is the best way to go. These again made here in house at Caliber Customs. I couldn't weld aluminum like this to save my life. So big thanks to my techs who are far superior than I am at aluminum welding and fabrication. So fixed in place and nice and sturdy for both feel and for safety's sake. One of the big talking points that I really enjoy, because I deal with a lot of these components on the day-to-day here at our shop, is a quick release. Your standard benchmark, say, of like an NRG quick release, you have to do two hands, do things like that. Then you get to like the Sparco units. To me, I think of the worst driver on the worst day trying to get out of the car when it's on fire needs to be able to touch one hand and pull that off. So huge shout out to Rossport. I think this is probably the best quick release I've ever put my hands on. And again, just ease of install. It is super solid, but comes off painlessly. I absolutely love this thing to death. I want to put it in every single car that I possibly can. Obviously, it doesn't have a locking mechanism for those that want a locked steering wheel, but I don't really think that's necessary. But for the fact you can't spline it wrong, it's on and it's sturdy every single time. I love that thing.
Well, we're waiting.
The biggest part of this car that everybody wants to talk about, the engine swap. Meet the 1UZ Lexus's 4-liter V8. This engine was actually pulled from an LS400. When I was trying to do the initial setup of this car, and I knew I wanted a good amount of power, I wanted in the territory of the 250 to 300 horsepower realm. I considered swaps like the K series and beams, and overall I wanted just that unrivaled level of reliability, and I could beat on this motor all day every day, wouldn't have to worry about aftermarket parts or things like that. So ended up with the 1UZ. If I did all over again, I'd pick the same setup. It's an absolutely wonderful engine, makes all the right noises, and it's a bunch of fun. The swap within itself, it is fairly straightforward. The firewall is not hammered. It does sit pretty well in the engine bay. The tricks that you can't quite see from the top, we will highlight on the bottom, but the subframe is dropped down about a full inch, and we made custom engine mounts to fit it. The headers are actually factory, if you would believe that. They do fit around the factory steering column quite well. It is kind of tough to see from up here on top, but it does show up down on the bottom.
Which we'll get it up on the lift.
Yeah. The other big point that really starts to stand out is the individual throttle bodies. Now, when I did this swap initially, I had it just as factory stock, and it made a bunch of power. It was enjoyable, but I always knew that I wanted to go with individual throttle bodies. One, for the sound, and two, for the fact that they do breathe well enough that it picks up a lot of power on the high RPM territory. I did weave it into an airbox because I do want to filter these, even if it's not a perfect filtration system. The fresh air is actually ducted through two Dacia filters and plummels through to the factory wiper cowl, which is all sealed from the interior. So all the fresh air is actually led this way, and it seals up into the top of the hood. Not perfect, but enough that you don't have large debris and sand and things like that, which the car never gets near, but it keeps a lot of the bad stuff out of the engine bay. A lot of the little tweaks and stuff, like the radiator itself, wouldn't quite fit in this real estate. There's not a lot of room left, so it is tucked under the factory core support and sunk down in. And again, I wanted to keep the ability to actually replace components if I needed them. So the radiator itself is actually a factory AE86 component, just hooked in to the factory system with custom made hoses to make it an unboltable part per se. Because this car does get tracked often, we do see some pretty high oil temperatures. So it's got a large Citrab oil cooler plumbed right through with a oil filter relocation kit. The oil in itself does stay actually relatively cool now that I've got this cooler on it, enough that I've done oil analysis after about a 3,000 mile stint of track use and autocross use and street use, and the oil analysis came back fantastic. So in retrospect, it's everything that this car is ever going to need. Our overflow tank catch can is a combo that, again, we built here in-house at Caliber Customs just to try to keep all your oil fumes from entering in the intake system. And like this, obviously it's not going to make it because there's open throttles, but you need to catch them somewhere so they're entering in the atmosphere and eating terrible, bad things like that. So a bit of a funny story about research and development on your own personal car. One of the things I was experiencing was I continued to have alternator failures. After about 3 or 4 track days, I had an alternator start to overcharge and realized after the track day, like, okay, maybe I just had an alternator fail. It's original. Why wouldn't it fail? I bought a new rebuilt unit, put it back in, and had it fail almost immediately without even a single track day on it. Went to replace that for a third unit, thought I just had unusual coincidence, and just in autocross it started to fail a second time. So I was had on 2 new units failing, and I knew something else was wrong. It was not the alternator's fault. What I came to realize, the alternator in itself was overheating, and the hot radiator air and the lack of airflow to the alternator was killing it. So I needed to feed it fresh airflow. So what I came up with was actually a NACA duct that's on the flat floor, feeding fresh air to the alternator itself, and a small PC Noctua fan. So when I'm autocrossing, I don't have that kind of airflow. It'll keep the alternator cool. And it's been great ever since. Sensual.
Put those balls in your face, baby.
I do enjoy a good ball in my face.
For recording.
Okay. Anyways, a big component of this is KW did step up and they sponsored this car with their full competition set coilovers. It is a little bit difficult to get a really good motorsports grade suspension for the AE86 because the spindle is directly attached to the strut body. So KW was super awesome, and we developed these set up here in Fresno, California, which is really cool for them to step up and take a part of that. Another big one is the brakes on Corollas. They suck because, again, not a big enough market to get a big manufacturer to step in, and like Brembo or AP Brakes. So this actually is developed by Garage Star, a discontinued setup that utilized the Miata Stop Tech binder and their own custom-made bracketry to run their rotor. And it's a really awesome setup. But to my personal dismay, Stop Tech has discontinued this caliper, this rotor, and everything. So getting parts for even this badass setup is actually really difficult. All right, we'll take a look at the rear coilover setup and get a look in the back. So in the AE86 world, this is considered a true coilover because it is mounted to the rear shock location. The factory 86 does run a spring on top of the axle for a rear perch. It does give you a lot more control in both ride height and actual spring preload over just your split setup. There's a lot of arguments which one's better, but this, in my personal opinion, is the way to go. For a full setup like this from KW, it is a bit higher cost because it is a competition set. typically in the $6,000 to $8,000 realm.
Whoa, 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 whoa. I thought you said $600.
Let's lift the car up and move on. Thank you guys for watching. I'd like to do a couple huge shout outs. First of all, to Caliber Customs, both for housing us here and taking care of the car in the best way possible. A huge thank you to my fiance, soon to be wife, who was very patient with me, taking care of all of my race car things and shooting this video with us today. Again, big thank you to KW Suspension for sponsoring this car. It has been a fantastic journey, both along the lines of learning and developing and being a part of such an awesome program. Huge thank you again to T-Rev Photography for shooting this video today, because I'm definitely not a pro and don't know what I'm doing. So yeah, please check out the channel. We'll keep uploading videos like this. I'd love to hear your thoughts and your ideas in the comments. Just jump in, tell me what you think. I love to hear more feedback of stuff we'd like to see. We've got a lot of awesome cars that roll through here, between endurance cars, drag cars, street cars, a little bit of everything. So just kind of want to give a little bit in depth of stuff that we do and really show that to people of the internet. So I'm on Instagram and YouTube as AE86 Mikey, so you can find me there. You can check out the Caliber Customs page, calibercustoms.com. Again, Caliber Customs on Instagram and Facebook, so you can check those out there. And check out T-Rev Photography on Instagram. He is a fantastic photographer that you should hire for your next motorsports event.
Thank you.
Wow.